Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the second episode of COM 425. Today, we're going to be talking about just an introduction to and definition of interpersonal communication with a specific focus on close personal communication. So I will dive right into that. I've got a PowerPoint prepared that we'll we'll work through together. If I can get that to show. Okay. Okay. Pardon me. So to begin, I have just a few announcements that we'll talk about a bit. Um, and I might as well do that first before I jump into the outline of the day. The first one is um, a thing that I think I forgot to mention yesterday. Yesterday we talked a little bit about the structure of the class. We walked through the syllabus. If you need a reminder on that, you can always go back to old videos. Check out episode 1 for a walkthrough of the syllabus, and we talked through class assignments, stuff like that. Today, we're also going to talk, I'd like to just kind of give you some other announcements, things that I thought of that I wished I would have said. And the first one is this. Um, I I didn't really talk about how many videos I plan there to be each week, nor did I mention how long I expect them to be. And that's for a fairly good reason. And that reason is that I just don't know. I don't know yet how long it will take. I think you will should probably anticipate, though, that there will be fairly lengthy um, videos each week in the neighborhood of 2 or 3 of them. I'm going to try my best. No, I am thinking maybe I did say some of this yesterday. And so if this is, turn me up 1.5 speed if you have to. If I'm saying the same thing twice, I apologize. If I'm fairly confident there'll be about 2 or 3 videos each week. I'm going to try my best to get them up earlier in the week rather than later in the week for I think what are fairly obvious reasons. And it's possible, pardon me, if I'm able to work ahead, I will, and I may post videos that are ahead. Now, there really is not a deadline to watch the videos. I expect that you will watch them. It would be um, very much against your best interest to not watch all the videos I'm going to share with you. Um, for one, there's no book for you to rely on, really. Well, you can rely on the book if you choose to buy it, but you don't have to. Um, and so a lot of the material that the test will be on will be covered in my lectures. So that's one, I think, fairly important reason. The other one is it's very likely that I'll expect you to know stuff I talk about in in these lectures, just like we were in an in-person class. I consider you to be responsible for the things that I share here. So do keep on top of them. I will try to have them posted as much as possible by the end of Wednesday, so that there will be nothing new video wise really Thursday and Friday. I will do that to the best of my ability. I can't make 100% a promise on that, but I'm going to work really hard so that you have the material for the week earlier in the week. Now, there's no expectation that you need to have watched the stuff that comes out the second it comes out, right? Um, I don't expect that at all. You can take your time. You can watch them at night. You can watch them at the end of the week altogether. Although I think that would probably get a little bit long listening to several hours of me on a Friday. I can think of a lot, a lot much more fun things to do on a Friday. But with that said, I would just encourage you to stay up on the videos. Do continue to watch them. You will hurt yourself in this class if you choose not to stay up on them. So That's the only announcement I have for right now. And I want to jump into our introductory outline. So today we'll talk a little bit about the need to belong and what that does um, for humans. We'll talk about the importance of close relationships in our lives. We'll work toward defining intimacy and also talk about some cultural changes that have occurred in intimacy over time and the way intimacy is displayed and developed in specifically in romantic relationships. Um, we'll talk about definitions of interpersonal communication, um, which I think is more interesting than I would imagine it sounds. There's actually quite a bit to think about there, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Um, the other thing that I'll mention, and this is, I guess, is sort of an announcement. I don't anticipate that the amount of time watching videos will equate to the amount of time that you would have spent in class. And there's a pretty simple reason for that. I have, when I teach this course in person, I build in a lot of time for us to have back and forth. I'm expecting that you'll make the most of the discussion boards that we have available to kind of make up for some of that. But that's going to mean that there's probably a little bit less time listening to me blabber on in front of a camera, which, let's be honest, is probably not the most interesting way for you to spend your time in this class. But rather, it does depend on you spending more time um, and participating in discussions with your classmates. So I really want to strongly encourage you to make use of the discussion boards. Um, each episode will have its own discussion board where you can feel free to ask questions, to tell a story, to engage with your classmates, any of those sorts of things. And those are all things that I'll look at when I go to evaluate your participation at the end of the term. So it doesn't mean you have to have a question for every episode. It doesn't mean that you have to, be on the discussion boards 24 hours a day and responding instantly. Not at all. I'm going to look at steady, sustained participation. So more than just showing up on the last week and posting a whole bunch of things, but steady, sustained participation that is meaningful. That's what I'm going to be looking for. So although these videos will probably be a little bit shorter than a traditional class period might have been, that's okay. And part of that is because you'll be making up for that in time that you're spending on the discussion boards. Okay, let's dive into the importance of close relationships. So it turns out people really suffer when they lack connection to other people. Um, I might be speaking the obvious right now to all of you, because if you're like me, for the past 60 or so days, the only people you've seen are masked shoppers at either Meijer, Kroger, or Costco, because those are the three places that I've been in the actually closer to 70 days at this point. Um, so it should not be a surprise to you that when I tell you that people suffer when they lack connection to other people, it can have a deleterious effect on our mental health and a number of other things. Now, close relationships are associated with there are a number of examples here. It turns out surviving cancer, your immune system suffers when you don't have as strong personal connections to people you care about. Another one, this is an interesting study, and I'll just kind of briefly mention it, healing from wounds. So there was a study, pardon me, that was done not super recently, but in the past 20 years or so, wherein the researchers actually brought people into the lab and very, very carefully, they had a medical professional there and they gave them a 1-inch cut in a safe spot, relatively speaking. They put, they dressed it, they put all sorts of antibiotic on it. And they put a Band-Aid over it, and they gave people a week. And in a week, people came back to the lab. And what they did was they measured the amount of close interpersonal conversations that the people had in that intermediate week. And then they looked to see the degree to which that cut had healed. And wouldn't you know, that those who had had more close interpersonal connections, close interpersonal conversations with friends and significant others, were they had far less of a cut still on them because that cut was more readily healed. This has, it's not magic, right? It's not at all that. What it is that there is a connection between the kinds of endorphins and hormones the body excretes when we have these close personal connections, and those biological markers have an effect on how well we're able to ward off disease and heal from disease. Same kind of thing with the susceptibility to the common cold, right? And that one again was a very similar study. And this sounds incredibly harsh given the current state of the world, but researchers exposed people to the common cold, and they looked to see to the degree to which people were able to recover from that cold, depending on how many close personal connections they had. Very, very interesting stuff. This one hits home for me: decreased blood pressure. I have some high blood pressure, both in my family and in my body. And so it turns out that one good way to decrease your blood pressure is to develop close personal relationships with people you care about and will care after you. Some of this, like I said, this is not magic. Some of this is just common sense. My wife, Jen, who I'll just share a picture of her really quick. Again, just to remind you, my wife Jen is now I can't find oh, there she is. I see, it was up for you and not for me. That was tricky. I'm sorry about that. My wife Jen, and there you can see my son Liam too. This is from when we were in Paris last year. We went to Europe last year for a trip. Jen teaches a class for doctoral students in the College of Education, and this trip took place out there. So Jen is a watcher of my diet, which is good. Don't ever tell her I told you it was good, but it really is a good thing that my wife watches over my diet. She ensures that I'm not just like chalking myself full of all sorts of sodium and things that would make my blood pressure go up. So part of the reason that that blood pressure is affected by close personal relationships, again, it's not magic. It's that the people who we have close personal relationships with are often really good at helping us to be a little bit more careful about our bodies. Okay. Longer lifespan. It turns out there are a lot of folks who in other parts of the world, specifically the island of Okinawa in Japan, there is a village there that has the highest ratio of people who are over 100 years old, centenarians, they call them, than anywhere else in the world. If you look at their everyday life, it's not, I mean, there's a lot of smokers. There's a lot of people eating Kobe beef, living a good life, sake pretty regularly. So it's not that they don't smoke. It's not that they don't drink. It's not even necessarily that they have a low-fat diet. What they do have is a lot of connections to other people. And A lot of folks, most sociologists think that this plays a big role in why we see people proceeding on to extremely advanced age in those communities. We find that people who have a lot of close personal connections are more resistant to and resilient when they receive a bout of depression. Additionally, recovery from stroke or heart attack. We know that people with close personal relationships tend to do better when in recovering from a stroke or a heart attack when they've got their close family members around, right? So that's why intimacy is important. But what is it? What do you think of when you hear the word intimacy, and what do you think makes a relationship intimate? Now, I'd be interested to hear your comments on this, and whether you agree or disagree with where I'm going to go with this. Um, in the discussion board posting that is a companion to this particular video, um, I think that what I hear the most often when I ask folks like yourselves what you think of when you hear the word intimacy and what you think makes a relationship intimate, I hear a lot about closeness. I hear a lot about, and this is before I usually ask this on the first couple of days before my students know me very well. Um, and toward the end of the semester, they realized that they could have just told me what they thought up front. Um, what I think most of you think of when you hear the word intimacy is you think of sex, right? You think of physical intimacy. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you thinking it, partially because you're partially right. That is a part for many romantic, if not most romantic relationships. Acts of physical intimacy are a big part of what makes up intimacy. It's not the only part. It may not even be in the long term the most important part. And that's probably a little disappointing to some of you, but in the long term, it's not going to be the physical intimacy that you treasure the most about a partner. But it is a part of what makes a relationship intimate or close. But other things that I think are really important that students will often say, just closeness, the idea of sharing secrets, um, and probably if given the task of really working through what is intimacy and what does it mean, I am guessing that most of you could pretty easily come up with a fairly complete list, right? This is not rocket science to figure out what intimacy is. Most of you have an innate sense for what intimacy is. Now, the book that is our guide here lists 6 components of intimacy, and I'll kind of walk us through those. I'm going to give you a list first, and we're going to talk about each of these things in turn. So, the first one is knowledge, caring, pardon me, interdependence, mutuality, trust, commitment. Those 6 things, okay? Those 6 things are the big ones. I'll just point out here that at any point you can pause me, you can take notes, you can move forward and backward. You're not there's nothing there's nothing stopping you from doing any of that. We're going to talk about each of those 6 things now in turn. So the first component of intimacy that I'd like to talk about is knowledge. And the recommended book describes knowledge as extensive and exclusive personal information about each other. Right? This is probably one of the first things we think of. If you're going to be intimate with a person, it means you know stuff about them that not everybody knows, right? And it's a lot of stuff that you know about them. You know about a wide portion of their life, and you know about their life very deeply, and you know about their life things that other people don't know. That's what we mean when we say extensive and exclusive, right? So it's deep information, but it's also information that is special to you that not everybody else knows about a person, right? Um, Caring is another one, and this is pretty common. By the way, um, I want to throw this out there on the nature of intimacy. Um, there is While often we think of physical intimacy as being a part of intimacy, and it often is in romantic relationships, you'll see from our definition of intimacy here that there is nothing necessarily innate about intimacy that means it must only be shared with a romantic partner. Okay. Intimacy can be shared, among parents and children. If you think about knowledge, for instance, right? Your parents have some fairly extensive and exclusive, parents or guardians or someone who occupies that role in your life, or if you are a parent, information you have about your child, you have extensive, exclusive personal information about one another, right? Um, Also, intimate partners feel more affection for one another than they do for most others. Now, I'm going to admit something to you that's going to make you think I'm a terrible person. That's because I am a terrible person. But there is like one kid in the world that I like, and that's my son Liam. Most other kids, well, that's not true. There are some other kids, but I definitely feel way stronger feelings about my son than I do anybody else's kid, right? I think he is one of the most amazing dudes, and you know, I would do almost anything for him. I have some colleagues who have kids that I don't feel nearly as favorable toward, right? Um, I just have a special bond with my son. I care about him more than I care about other other kids, other people. I just do, right? It's because we have an intimate relationship. And those kinds of relationships, especially while you're raising children who are young, that's very common, right? Interdependence, right? Now, this is where the parent-child relationship sort of breaks down a little bit. And we don't necessarily see as neat of an analog with intimacy. So, interdependence infers that intimate partners have a frequent, strong, diverse, and enduring influence on each other. So it's very common. There's back and forth, right? But that's an important part of what interdependence means. Um, I know that the words frequent, strong, diverse, and enduring are popping up really big on your screen, and I've even got them italicized. I actually think the most important part of this definition is when I'm talking about influence on each other. That means that it's not just a one-way influence, right? If I think about my relationship with my son Liam, um, it's changed now that he's poised to be a teenager next year. But when he was very young, most of the influence, well, he would influence us, but never because he really intended to. It was because he was a child and he needed to be thought about. But the idea of interdependence is that there's a mutual influence, right? A mutual influence of peers. So this is an important component of intimacy, is that um, something about intimacy sort of infers that you've got two equals who are both able to influence one another, right? It's not that there is one influencer, one powerful uh, partner, and one submissive partner. That's not really the idea of intimacy, or at least not of healthy intimacy, that we're talking about when we talk about intimacy as we define it scientifically. Um, we're talking about two people that are able to have an effect on one another. And the way they do that frequently. It's a strong effect. It's a diverse effect. It affects many different parts of your life, and it's enduring. It lasts a long time. Okay. Mutuality. Intimate partners also think of themselves as a couple instead of two entirely separate individuals. Um, well, I think one of the best ways to describe that is I've got a little diagram of um, a scale we use to measure mutuality in science. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this or taken it in a class of any form or as a part of a research requirement for a class. Um, it's called the inclusion of the other in the self scale. So the idea with this scale is if I think of myself and my partner, I can probably I could probably diagram in sort of a Venn diagram the degree to which myself and my partner are the same person or the degree to which we overlap. No, obviously we're not the same person, but there is often some overlap. I don't think of my wife Jen and myself as completely separate people, right? When I make decisions about stuff I'm going to do, I think about her and I think about how this is going to affect her life. Now, there are some people, and sometimes even fairly happy relationships, that think of themselves as completely separate from the other. And so we've got two autonomously acting individuals. But the idea of mutuality as a part of intimacy is that there's got to be some overlap between the two people, and that ha- has a big effect on mutuality and how it can affect intimacy. So moving on, another thing that intimate partners expect is a level of trust between one another. So intimate partners expect treatment from one another that's fair, that's honorable, and it's responsive to their needs, right? So absolutely, that's the case. We expect that our partner is going to treat us fairly, that our partner is not going to do things that seek to harm us. So it's the idea that we have this expectation about our partner's future behavior. And that's another big component of the nature of intimacy. And then finally, intimate partners expect their relationship to continue. And that's what we mean when we say commitment, that there will be bumps in the road, but even when there are bumps in the road, this relationship, we expect it to continue on, right? One person has made a choice that, well, not one person, but both people have made a choice that this thing that is bigger than them, that is their relationship, is going to continue on no matter the bumps in the road. You're going to work through it together, right? And so uh, that that level of commitment is absolutely an essential component of intimacy. So I'm going to briefly switch over and we're going to watch a short film that illustrates a few things about some of the ways that relationships have changed over time. And the reason I think it's important to um, illustrate that the relationships have changed over time is that there really have a lot been some similarities, but then also some changes in the ways that intimacy develops and that close personal relationships develop and begin, especially. So I've got this fairly short video that I'd like us to take a look at. I'm going to flip over to hopefully to the proper screen. I'm going to step out of the screen real quick while I let you folks watch this.
This is a story about what to do on a date. It begins one early summer afternoon. It begins with Jeff and Kay and Nick. Of course, you may not have a problem about what to do on a date, but Nick, well, he has a real dating problem. If he took Kay out on a date, what would they do? Where would they go?
Just a minute, Jeff. I'll get my tennis racket.
Okay, Nick, but hurry. Hey, what about asking Kay to come to the community center with us on Friday to fix up that scavenger sale? We could make it a double date.
What?
You heard what I said.
That's no place to take a girl on a date. Helping to fix up the scavenger sale. Is it?
Why not?
On a first date?
First date?
Yeah. Kay's a swell girl. I was thinking of calling her. Maybe ask her to the show Friday. Good picture. Wagon train.
Well, hurry up and call her and let's get going. I still have to get my things yet.
Call her now?
Sure. You know the number, don't you?
Okay. What if she says no?
Hello?
Oh, hello, Kay. This is Nick Baxter.
Oh, hello, Nick. How are you?
Fine, thanks. Say, Kay, next Friday, would you like to see Wagon Train at the movies?
Oh, I'm sorry, Nick. I suppose you've got your mind made up to see it?
You've seen it? She's already seen it.
Well, ask her about the scavenger sale. Go ahead.
Kay, you wouldn't want to help get the scavenger sale ready at the community center, would you?
Oh, I've been hearing about that. Yes, I'd like to very much.
You would? All right. I'll call for you then. About 7? Bye. I sure didn't think she'd go to a place like that for a date. Where's my racket? Oh, ready?
You know, you better think some more, fellow, about what to do on a date.
Do you think she'll have a good time? What do you suppose I'll have to do? You know who else?
Now, you may not have thought of this sort of thing as a place to take a date, but it looks like it could be fun. A group doing things together. Pretty good idea for a first date. Plenty to do, plenty of people to talk to. But let's see if Nick and Kay are enjoying it.
No amount of stuff to make this thing look any older.
Boy, that is an old timer.
Hey, Nick, can you help me put the sign up?
Oh, sure.
I can't quite reach that far.
How's this?
That's about right.
Say, Kay, are you really having a good time?
Of course I am. I'm glad you thought of coming here.
So am I. I mean, yes, it was a good idea.
Okay. How about helping with refreshments for the gang?
All right. See you later.
Oh, yeah, oh, sure. Got any more tacks?
I think they're over there by the door.
Yes, it was a good idea to come here. How does Jeff get ideas like that? Hey, what's this? Maybe this is where Jeff gets ideas. A list of coming activities. A bike trip. That could be a lot of fun. A chance to do things with a group, to get acquainted. It does look like a good time, if your partner likes it. Would Kay enjoy a bike trip? Or a weenie roast? Another group date. A chance to learn the give and take of working and playing together. Not much arranging needed, not much expense, and that can be important. Could be a fine date, if Kay would like it. Wonder if she'd like to go to a baseball game. A date that's not too involved, one you can carry through comfortably. And there are all sorts of other sports events, inexpensive dates, most of them. Swimming meets, for example. You can find many good ideas for dates. Dates that give you a good chance to get acquainted. And dates that you don't have to worry too much about in advance. It was a good deal coming here tonight, double dating with Jeff and Phyllis. When all four are good friends and enjoy the same things, double dates can be lots of fun. Or you can ask Kay to go on dates with you alone, if you plan for what she enjoys.
Hey, you loafer. What are you doing over there?
You're right there.
Fine thing. As soon as Kay isn't around to supervise, you go off on a vacation.
You know, Maestro, I don't think your date ideas are so original.
What?
About what to do on a date, I mean. But what I'd like to know is, how can you figure out what a girl would like to do? A certain girl, I mean.
Well, you might ask her.
Yeah, Nick's looking for you. Is he good company? He always seems so quiet.
We get along all right. He's got a good sense of humor, and we haven't run out of things to say yet.
He's kind of cute. You gonna date him again?
I don't know. Besides, he hasn't asked me. George, get out of there.
I'm hungry.
If you want to do something, take the Cokes out there.
Okay, come on, where you go?
Coke left?
I think so. Come and get it, everybody.
Come on, we eat. Let's go.
Eat after your own trip.
Hi, stranger.
I decided to come out of hiding.
Say, this looks good. You make the sandwiches?
Gladly to get the dope, but... Boy, this one is for us. Where should we go?
How about over here?
Oh, first.
Your table, madame.
Thank you, sir. This is fun, isn't it?
Yeah. You're sure you like to do things like this?
Sure.
I thought all girls wanted fellas to take them to fancy places, spend lots of money.
Not this girl.
You know, I sort of like things like this too. You won't laugh, I like to go on bicycle trips too. Do you?
And miniature golf. You're not there.
Yeah, and weenie roasts and square dancing.
And baseball games and tapping poles. I think they're swell.
Say, you like to do lots of things, don't you? Say, Kay, next Friday there's going to be a weenie roast, or there'll be a bowling party if you'd rather do that. Or we could go to the band concert.
Oh, I'd enjoy going to the weenie roast very much. Unless you'd rather go bowling.
No, I'd rather go to the weenie roast. If Jeff goes with Phyllis, we could double date with them.
Hey, Nick, hey, come on. We're going to break open the ice cream.
Okay, be right there. Is it all right then? About Friday?
Yes, Nick. It's the day.
Yes, there are lots of things to do on dates. If you know how to look for them, if you plan them with the other person in mind, and if you really try to make sure each date's a good time. If you do these things, you'll know what to do on your date.
Okay. That is certainly a little bit older than probably most of you are familiar with. So things have certainly changed, right? Things have changed in the way we work to develop intimate relationship. All right, this is not new share. There we go. Okay. I'd be really interested to hear some of your thoughts on this. This certainly, again, when I pose these prompts, it doesn't mean everybody has to have something to say. But I'm going to ask a few questions based on my experience having taught this class before. So things are substantially different now. Think of yourself, and what would happen if you now wanted to initiate a romantic relationship with a partner, or how you initiated your romantic relationship with a partner if you met that person at college, right? There are a lot of things that have changed. If we think of the story that we just watched, there were a lot of very formalized structures and rules that really had to be followed, or in most cases were followed, at least, wherein the male is the person who calls the female to ask her if she wants to go out on a date, and then he asks again, and then eventually they are dating. I'm not even sure what you guys do. It's weird to me. I've asked this question many times before, and you described this sort of weird scenario in which you're just kind of hanging out, and you're both supposed to, you and whoever your partner is, you're both kind of supposed to know something's up, and that maybe you're both interested in one another, but you're still just kind of hanging out. And then I don't really even understand how it works. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. What has changed? How are things different than they used to be? Do you really like them the way that they are? Well, I won't tell you how classes in the past have come down on that question. It's a question that I'm very interested in, though. I don't know necessarily that the way things are today are what I would have chosen for myself, and that's not the way they were when I met and fell in love with and married my wife. On the other hand, I can see some potential benefits from those kinds of things. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and so if you're willing to, for a few of you to share your story and how you think things have changed in getting to know a romantic partner, and starting to get into a relationship with a romantic partner, how things have changed from the video we watched to now, and then what do you think the pluses and the minuses are of the way things have become? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. So some of those questions we'll answer on our own here. Certainly, some of the cultural changes that have taken place between then and now are at work, right? So increasing socioeconomic development. One thing that we see is the degree to which a dater or a person who was dating or person who was entering into a relationship 100 years ago or even 75 years ago or even 50 years ago, although a little bit less so 50 years ago, but 75 years ago for sure in the approximately 1945, 1950 range, right? It had a lot to do with the amount of wealth that was afforded the male partner, right? So as the wealth and status of women in general and access to financial means that women have really started to develop, we do see some changes, right? So it's not always all up to the guy to decide how expensive of a thing he wants to do. It's not always the case that, you know, if a man and a woman, for instance, go out for a meal, that the man will always pay. I want to briefly mention here, because I'm talking a lot about men and women, right? And in terms of increasing socioeconomic development, many of the changes are male or female linked. However, most of the stuff that we talk about in this class, most of the principles that we learn about, does not really only apply to heterosexual relationships, right? I have, as a heterosexual cisgendered male, you're going to hear me probably just kind of default to that, and it's really not my intention to default to that, and I will work to make my examples more inclusive. However, forgive me when they're not, and forgive me when they're really more structured around heterosexual types of relationships, because in reality, almost all of the principles that we're going to talk about in this whole class apply equally to homosexual relationships, just like they do heterosexual ones. There's nothing particular. There are some small things that are a little bit different about homosexual relationships compared to heterosexual ones, but for the most part, things are pretty much the same in terms of the principles and the theories we're going to learn about. Another thing that's changed is a greater individualism, right? And especially in the United States, individualism is really a big deal. And it's a thing that has developed over the course of the past 75 years even. If you think back to World War II, there was a whole lot less complaining about giving up things for the public good in World War II. Here we are at a time that is not all that dissimilar in terms of major international crises, with what's going on with COVID-19. And there are many stories of Americans who are absolutely unwilling to give up things that make their lives more convenient for the sake of the public good, right? We've become more individualistic. And you see in instances of that in the video we just watched, right? So a big group of young people get together to plan something that was, you know, a sale for the community, right? This is something that is a bit of a foreign experience. And the idea of this small town neighborhood of kids all about the same age kind of getting together to hang out and spend time together, much more common in the past than now. So our greater individualism has had an effect. on the ways that we spend our leisure time. And it certainly has had effect. Anything that has an effect on the way we spend our leisure time also has an effect on the way that we meet people and get together in romantic relationships. New technology, to state what I think is probably pretty obvious, technology plays a huge role now in getting together. No longer is it the case probably that you have to place a call on a landline. I think if you tried to place a call on a landline and ask somebody out on a date, you would be hard pressed to find a person with a landline. Not only that, we have different modes of technology that we use to interact with one another. We'll be talking about those throughout the course of the semester. So culture has changed, society has changed, and that's all had an effect on the way that we get together, and the way that we develop relationships. So, and this kind of gets to the heart of the matter, how do we define interpersonal communication? There are a lot of ways to do this, right? And communication scholars, I'll tell you up front, communication scholars don't even agree about the best way to define interpersonal communication. There are probably as many unique definitions of interpersonal communication as there are scholars of interpersonal communication. With that said, there are a few similar definitions that have had staying power. Now, I could tell you about a lot of them. Instead, I'm going to go and tell you just about the one or two that I really like, and that have formed the basis of my understanding, the way I think about interpersonal communication. So, with that said, we'll start off with where your book leads us, and I'm going to use this sort of to describe some critiques I have. I'll tell you where I have critiques and where I don't. Interpersonal communication is dyadic. Okay, kinda. So what we mean when we say interpersonal communication is dyadic is that it's communication between two people, right? That would mean that if you're sitting around a table with your parents or guardians or two other people, and you're having a conversation, that's not interpersonal communication. If you sit down at the dinner table with your family, that's not interpersonal communication. Now, there's some argument to be made that family communication is different in some unique respects, and or that it's group communication. We start adding in more than two people. To me, whether that communication includes just two people or it's three people, it doesn't matter all that much, to be honest with you. For most of the work that I do, I don't find that to be a useful component of a definition, right? For other people, it's a deal breaker. It's a really important thing. I don't necessarily find that communication being simply dyadic and not including more. Now, I do think that, pardon me, when you get to 6 or 7 people, that communication is probably a little bit more groupy than it is interpersonal in nature. It's very hard to have an interpersonal communication or an interpersonal conversation with 6, 7 other people, right? That's hard. And things change. The depth of the communication often changes. So I guess with that said, some will argue that interpersonal communication tends to be dynamic. I agree that it is usually informal. We're usually not doing these big formal tasks. The bulk of interpersonal communication is, hey, what do you want for dinner tonight? Or what do you want to do tonight? What do you want to watch tonight? How far ahead of you am I in this Netflix series? You know, this sort of thing. It's usually very informal. There's usually a lot of feedback, right? So interpersonal communication is not a monologue being delivered that's really sort of a one-way thing. I would very much argue that what I'm doing right now with you, even though I tell you stories about my family, stories about things that matter a lot to me, this is not interpersonal communication, right? This is a one-way message train. It's one of the reasons I dislike that about teaching this class online, and it's one of the reasons I want to encourage you to involve yourself in the discussion boards, the discussion board postings for each of these episodes that will be posted. So today for episode 2, and the reason is simple, because in a discussion board, there can be a back and forth. You and I can share messages back and forth. It might not be face to face, but there's usually going to be able to be some feedback. Like you're going to be able to say a thing and I can either agree with it or disagree with it. Or I'm going to say a thing and you can agree with it or disagree with it. Right now, the way we communicate and the way I send this message, I'm sending a message and you might disagree with that message, but there's no way for you to, I mean, I guess you could hit the dislike button on the, please don't do that. That'll make me really sad. You could hit the dislike button on this video and I would get some sort of feedback, but that's pretty unclear feedback in the grand scheme of things, right? A thumbs up or thumbs down on what is probably over an hour long video, that's pretty complex. So there's a lot more feedback when we're having a conversation, and that's a part of interpersonal communication. That feedback is immediate, right? Now, I'm a little bit less concerned about the speed of feedback. I actually don't think that matters at all. Feedback is immediate, comes to us from, I think, a time when we presumed that computer-mediated communication or asynchronous communication was less personal, was less interpersonal. And that's not a contention I agree with. So I think that there can be plenty of feedback, and I don't think it always needs to be immediate feedback. I do think that people in interpersonal communication often have flexible roles, right? So you're not always the same person at the same time, and seeing that is kind of an interesting and important part of interpersonal communication. How do we define communication in close relationships? I've got my picture of Jen and Liam and I at the Eiffel Tower, or at the plaza overlooking the park wherein the Eiffel Tower is located. So one way that we could define interpersonal communication is to simply take those previous characteristics that we talked about and say, you know, dyadic and formal, and add on in close relationships, dyadic communication in close relationships. I think that there are better ways to do it. And the way that I would like to encourage us to think this term is we can consider the level of the information exchanged. So two scholars, one of whom was a doctoral student in the Department of Communication at Michigan State many years ago, and his advisor, who was the chair of the Department of Communication at Michigan State also many years ago, G.R. Miller and Mark Steinberg, wrote a book. That book is entitled Between People. And to this date, I think it's one of the most interesting and engaging interpersonal communication texts. And the way that they define interpersonal communication is, I think, interesting. And that definition has been recently augmented in a chapter actually that my advisor, Dr. Joe Walther, wrote in a book that was edited by Steve Wilson and Sandy Smith, who's a faculty member in the department here. So I'd like to talk you through kind of that evolution of ideas. So Miller and Steinberg suggested that the most basic level of knowledge that we could have, the most basic level of knowledge and predictions that we can make about a person is based on cultural level predictions, right? So when I was in France with Jen and Liam last summer, I could make some pretty general predictions about everybody I ran into in Paris. And one of those predictions was they like wine and they speak French. And these are pretty basic things, to be able to make a prediction about. And our cultural level predictions are often stereotypical. They don't really tell us that much. I mean, a person who likes wine and speaks French, knowing that about them doesn't really tell me that much about them in the grand scheme of things, right? If we want to have an interpersonal relationship with a person, we expect that we're going to have a deeper level of knowledge than just that cultural level stuff, right? So let's take this a step farther, and let's perhaps say that this is we have some sociological level knowledge. So I'm still in France, and we go to Sacré-Cœur, which is a beautiful church at the top of a hill, built cathedral at the top of a hill. And when we had been in Paris, it was just after Notre Dame had burned, so we were jonesing for a cathedral to go check out because they're beautiful. And so we went up to Sacré-Cœur, and I walked in and I saw a priest. Okay. So I knew that that priest was French, and he probably spoke French. I knew that he probably liked wine because he was French, but I also knew he was a priest, right? And so I had a few other things that I could probably make predictions about him. At that point, I didn't just have cultural level knowledge. I didn't know he was just French, but I also knew he was a priest because of how he was dressed, right? And I could make another set of predictions. Now, these predictions were ultimately still sociological level predictions. They weren't that deep. There's a whole lot more to knowing a person just than knowing what their job is or what their nationality is, right? So Miller and Steinberg proposed that interpersonal communication doesn't really happen when we only know people at those levels. But when we get to know a person's idiosyncrasies, that is, how they're different from just who they are culturally or just who they are sociologically, once we know that, we can make psychological level predictions. Once we know a person's idiosyncrasies, that's when interpersonal communication will happen. Okay. Now, a few years later, in fact, actually almost 45 or 50 years later, Joe Walters was writing about a definition of interpersonal communication and suggested that there might be a level, there probably is a level, definitely is a level beyond psychological level knowledge. So it's when you have psychological level knowledge about a person, the kinds of predictions that you can make about them are based on their idiosyncrasies. But their idiosyncrasies, I mean, if you've got a group of 50 friends, you might know most of those friends have one or two idiosyncrasies, right? And in fact, everybody may know that this one person, like if you know me, you know my idiosyncrasy is that on a tailgate Saturday morning, I'm going to be out and I'm going to be 3 beers deep by 9 a.m. because that's part of who I am. I have a special dispensation to drink beer on Saturday morning when MSU football is playing in town. So now you know too, right? You have this psychological level knowledge about me, but does that really mean that you know me interpersonally? Well, Joe said, those are good things to know, and that's valuable information. And maybe we can have interpersonal communication at that level, but there's something better, and that's personal communication. Now, Joe argued that personal communication happens when not only can we make predictions about how this person will behave in idiosyncratic ways to everyone, but I know how this person will behave idiosyncratically just with me, right? That's a different and special level of knowledge. So I know this about Jen. Jen is, when she gets tired, she can sometimes be not very nice to me. And to be honest, that's a two-way street. Actually, this is really more about me. When I get tired, I am not very nice to Jen. When Jen gets hungry, she is not very nice to me. And when Liam gets hungry, she's not very nice to me. Now, the interesting thing is that if Jen is hungry and one of her colleagues comes up to her and says the exact same thing that I would say to her, she'll respond kindly to her colleagues, right? It's not that Jed's idiosyncrasies don't count, or that she's going to behave in a different way, or that when I'm tired, I'm mean to her, but not to other people. I pull it together for other people. We know that we have the ability to treat each other idiosyncratically in ways that our idiosyncrasies don't explain about everybody else, right? I know that's kind of complex. If you have questions about that, post about it, and I can try to clarify the discussion forum too. I'm just going to briefly mention as I close up here a few other topics in chapter 1. Talks a little bit about individual differences, attachment style, sex, and gender. Most of this, because I'm not requiring the book, I'm not going to be asking about. If you have questions about sex and gender and how they're different, we can deal with that in the discussion forum. I'm happy to chat a little bit about that, although I bet some of your classmates can answer that question as well, from other classes, a little bit about personality. The reasons that we don't talk about as many of these things, that the book, if you're following along with it, again, recommended, not required, so you don't have to be. But the reason that the book talks about these is the book is written very much from a social psychological perspective. And in social psychology, these are much bigger issues. I'm trying to bring in a little bit more about actual communication and message sharing. And so I'm going to focus on some of these other things, and that will be the case throughout this term. So with that, I'm going to end it for today. Next time, hopefully tomorrow, I'll be posting something about research methods, and we will dive into that topic. Now, I believe that on your syllabus, research methods is one of those topics that's kind of split up over a matter of a couple of different weeks. So I'll say this: I will probably try to just get research methods done tomorrow, which means that if you can't make it through that whole video, don't worry about it. You can come back and you can spread that out over this week and next week, but you'll have it available to you earlier rather than later, okay? Office hours, last thing I'll mention. I will have office hours tomorrow from 10 to noon Eastern Standard Time. And I will post a Zoom link that you will be able to freely hop in if you would like, and come hang out in office hours. It's not required, but I will be there, and let me know if there's another time too that works a little bit better for you. I'll probably try to push you toward those hours because it is taking me quite a bit of time to manage and keep everything together for this class. But if it's absolutely an impossibility, just let me know and we'll figure something out. Okay. All right. That is all I have for today. And we'll talk again soon. Thank you very much.